So this is not an intro that I get to say very often, but this is the single best measuring amplifier and DAC stack I have ever reviewed. And as far as papered specs go, it's really not even close. This is a seriously impressive stack, and today we're going to talk about it. For full transparency, Oppos, the audio store, sent this out. Topping had nothing to do with this review, and like always, all thoughts and opinions are my own. I'm sure it was expensive for Topping to send this out. I do have affiliate links down below if you do want to use them. Do not feel obligated, but if you are going to pick them up, I would appreciate it if you would use those. Thanks a lot. Okay, the specifications are wild. Internally, this uses something called a Tang-Kula circuit, which is similar to actually the A70 Pro. This has 22 watts into 16 ohms out of its balanced headphone output for the A900. It's got 14 watts into 32 ohms, which is just absolutely stupid. This outputs 60 volts peak to peak and has a fully balanced relay control that you can actually hear. And the measured dynamic range is actually a record at 151 dB, which is insane. The A900 is a technical marvel to be sure. There are amps that have a lot of power and amps that measure very well, but not really has it been done to the level that this has been doing it. So this is definitely the best measurement box that I've reviewed, and all these specifications, all this build, all these input and output options, all for about $1,200, which is surprisingly an affordable price tag given what else is on the market, because there really isn't anything like this. And on paper, it's the best amplifier that I've actually listened to as far as accuracy goes. But what's funny is that one of the most impressive things about this isn't actually about this. It's about some of their lower end amps and just how good some of their lower end amps like the DX5 II are. And I'll talk more about this in the end. Now the D900 is a whole nother type of beast. This also shares some really incredible measurements when it comes to things like total harmonic distortion, which on both the A900 and D900 are incredibly low. The DAC does sit fairly high in price, being about $1,800, so you're looking at about $3,000 for the full stack, which as far as what it can do is actually fairly affordable compared to what else is out there, but it's still fairly expensive, obviously. But when you're looking for comparable DACs that measure as well, this is actually on the more affordable price end, which is crazy, but that's where we're at. The D900 uses something that's actually known for being a single bit or a 1-bit DAC. And these DACs are extremely simple, but they work well, and typically they're somewhat expensive to actually implement in a system like this if you want to get everything to a high-end level. Now, a lot of this stuff is theory, and I don't know if it actually affects sound all that much, but theoretically, this should be doing quite a few things. One, theoretically, this is supposed to basically reduce noise and any possible distortion down to essentially zero. This should also have near perfect timing and almost no jitter. And as far as actually what you can hear, this is one of those things where all of this stuff is maybe detectable by a measurement system, but is probably not going to be detectable to the ear unless something is seriously wrong. And DACs have been like that for a while. The Z900 definitely doesn't actually stand alone for being that good, but it does pair with the A900 pretty well for obvious reasons. And you also have tons of different inputs and the option to use Topping Tune, which is their new EQ software that you can upload custom profiles to the DAC only. It doesn't have an option for the A900 currently. And you can actually store those profiles on the device, which is really awesome. Personally, I'm a big fan of just the simple inbuilt warm preset. I think that sounds really, really good for most headphones. Slight roll off in the top end. It's really nice. Now for overall build and design, I actually really like the more simplistic approach that they have for the visuals. There is one complaint that I have for both though, and that's that the buttons next to the screen are really hard to see and basically impossible to see at night. It's kind of annoying to use. I get that they're going for this really clean, minimalistic view, but I wish this was better implemented, especially because sometimes you don't remember exactly which order the buttons are in because you can't really see them. Not really anything that would hold me back from purchasing it, but it's, there. And each of these will come with their own nicer than usual remote for as far as Topping goes. It's got an aluminum housing. It's not the fully plastic one that you'll get with things like the DX5. So it feels nice. And with the new menu settings that this seems to share with the DX5, you can customize the A and B buttons on the remote to control a lot of things. But one of the big things, for me at least, is either switching different EQ profiles or just turning EQ on and off. One thing I really love about their implementation of EQ here is that it's fast. As soon as you switch it, you hear the differences. And I think that if you're A/B switching between two different presets, that's really nice to be able to hear even a small change just really rapidly, and you can switch back and forth if you're using the software. So I'm really a big fan of this. As far as headphones go, anything literally anything. If you have Susvaras or Tungstens or old HE6s that you think only a speaker amp can drive, or whatever headphone, this will run it with tons and tons and tons and tons of headroom. This is truly a preposterously powerful amp, and I really don't see a need for any more power than this offers. This just has gobs and gobs and gobs of power, and you will never hit its power cap. And the fact that they're doing all this power with the specifications that this has is genuinely quite impressive. Now, I've listened to this amp on every headphone that I have here, but the two hardest to drive headphones that I noticed the most sound difference with is the Susvara Unveiled and the SJY Carbon. These are just really hard to drive headphones. One's a closed back, one's an open back, and usually where I notice the biggest difference between this amp and a lot of other amps is in the ease of bass. It's a hard to define sound characteristic where you don't really feel like the amp has to try at all. Whereas you feel on a lower end amp that you're really pushing the capabilities of the amp. And I feel like this is audible mostly in the fidelity and the dynamic impact of bass. When it feels effortless, when it feels clean and clear, and it's not lacking that fidelity like some lower amps can deliver, that's where you see the benefit of power for a headphone like Susvara Unveiled. Now, to be honest, there are lots of amps that can do this and lots of amps that deliver a lot of power. And so this isn't necessarily unique, but I do think that what this is kind of like the barrier to where you don't really need to go any further. You're not really going to get much better for impact without the use of EQ, for example, which, this has. As far as overall sound quality, it's basically like a perfect system. It's basically the pinnacle of solid state sound. It's ultra precise, ultra vivid. It has a neutral tonal palette, and you're kind of letting your headphone choice dictate the tone that's coming out of your sound quality. And this is just taking a pure signal and basically delivering a pure signal to the headphones, and then the headphones are making up all the fun stuff. Now, that record-breaking dynamic range, I want to explain a little bit of how this works, because there seems to be some confusion that I've seen online when people are saying, oh, it's a really dynamic amp. The truth is that's not really how this works. Most music, for example, is mixed anywhere between roughly 5 dB to about 40 dB on kind of the extended end for dynamic range. And the way that this works for a DAC is that it should be taking that and dividing that dynamic range up properly and sending that signal to an amplifier. Now, an amplifier is taking that, let's say 10 dB dynamic range, and if it's accurate, it'll still display about 10 dB. It's not going to stretch that dynamic range. So there's actually amps that sound a bit more dynamic than this. For example, the tube amp, the Mogwai SE from Amps & Sound, is a more dynamic sounding amp than this is, but that's out of distortion. Now, it's distortion in a pleasing way that is really fun and enjoyable to listen to, but it's not as accurate. And it's for a completely different audience, but it is more dynamic sounding. So an amplifier and a DAC like this, if they're doing the job correctly, shouldn't be stretching that dynamic range. You should just be hearing what it actually is. The dynamic range spec here is more of like a, hey, look what I could do if you asked me to sort of thing. It's still very impressive, but it's not really applicable to most music. What is applicable to most music is how sound staging and separation happens and the quality of a really busy mix. This is where you play like a really big dynamic range song that also has a lot of different instruments and a lot of different elements to that song going on all at once. That's ideal. One test song that I absolutely love is called Mountains from Hans Zimmer. And the reason why is because if you have crappy speakers or crappy headphones or a crappy amplifier, this song is gonna fall apart. It will not hit with the slam, the size, the scale, and the fidelity that it can on a really good system. So listening to this amp, I'm listening for kind of micro instrument separation where things sound like here and something sounds here and something sounds here. And also a wall of sound because it can really deliver that effect. And also the dynamic range in the bass response and that dynamic slam that comes when the song really hits. And then also listening to see if it's kind of making the headphones bug out and kind of crap out at a certain level, which can happen with lower end amps or lower end headphones. As far as that song goes, this amplifier has played that song better than anything else I have ever heard, which is awesome because I listen to that song and everything. It's really, really good. And it's maybe not the highest fidelity recording, but it is an extremely demanding song because of the frequency range that it offers, the dynamic range that it offers, the size and the scale that it can have. And if it can display all that well, it's actually pretty telling. Personally, I find this to be a much more telling test than listening to a song like Long After You're Gone from Chris Jones, I think it is. There's just not a lot happening in that song. It's not really demanding or stretching the system too much. And Mountains is. Now with other more standard soundstaging tracks, I'm listening for not just the instrument placement, but also the ability to isolate the edges and define where things are, and then the gap between the one instrument and another. I kind of want to be able to auditorily visualize that empty space. And I think that really good amplifiers like the A900 or even like the DX5 are really good at kind of having that empty space. And I heard it once described as like the blackness between instruments. And we're also trying to avoid kind of blurring the lines between placement. And I think a really good amplifier like an A900 is just ultra good at doing that. They just nail that separation every single time. Perhaps that's a result of the DAC, perhaps that's a result of the amp, or maybe a combo of the two, but the instrument separation and the soundstaging placement is impeccable with this system. When it comes to sharpness, this is a masterclass of how sharpness and resolution are not the same thing. This is a bit like going from like 1080p to 4K, right? There is an ease to the viewing experience. And if it's done properly, you're not looking at an overly sharpened image. You're just looking at something that naturally has more fidelity. And that's sort of what this sounds like. It just sounds crystal clear without being sharp. If you're used to some of Topping's other amplifiers, if you're coming from like a standard A90, not the discrete version, that amp is going to be much sharper. But the A900 is going to be a lot less sharp in terms of like that clinical sharpness, but it's going to have higher overall resolution. You'll be able to auditorily see more or hear more. This not only ends up being really good for the individual edges of instruments, but it also has a lot to do with how finite of a texture an instrument can have or a voice can have, and all those kind of micro fluctuations that you want to hear. I feel like this amp, you can really hear them if they're in the recording. Now for IEMs, feel free to use them. The measurements are amazing. I would definitely use it in low gain out of the single-ended output because that'll have a lot less power. But yeah, they're obviously incredible. Now, while this is the single most technically impressive DAC amp stack that I've ever used, what's actually more impressive to me is these small amplifiers, the DX5 too. It almost highlights exactly how good this is by the delta between these two not being that far. Now, if you were to push the volume or look at specs like the power alone, yeah, this obviously seems like more power, but this has more than almost every headphone needs already. So this is just like extra headroom. And it's not that there's no sound difference. It's just that the sound difference between these two is so small and is honestly not affecting most headphones. Out of the group of headphones that I have here, I really only notice a sound difference on maybe 2 or 3 of them. And it's so minor that it's like almost laughable, which is crazy. But it's there. But it really does highlight just how good something like this is. Now, in the review of the DX5, I talked about how this is the amplifier for 99% of people, including audiophiles. And I think that's true. The DX5 can run every headphone, even this as far as to a level that sounds amazing. It's got tons of power. It's got really good specifications as well. I just have zero issues recommending it. The A900 and D900 stack, that's for that last 1% of headphones and that last 1% of people who are going to care enough to spend 10 times the price to get a little bit better performance. And that's kind of the current state of this technology and very impressive. And I'm sure that Topping is happy to offer both options to both customers. So Topping being what they are, I can see them topping this, no pun intended. But I'm honestly not sure what else you're going to get as far as actual tangible sound quality moving forward. They're going to have to really do some unique things to make amps stand out in the future, I think. So the ball's in their court. But yeah, as far as this being just a really well-performing, really good sounding solid-state amplifier and DAC system, it's the best, man. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.